This film is not as bad as the outrage clickbaity machine the internet has become might have led you to think.
Are you serious?
Lionsgate, Neil Marshall, you all had one job. One! To bring back the spirit of the first two Hellboy movies, which were made by Guillermo del Toro, and they stand as one of the most underrated gems in his entire filmography. With incredible practical effects, cool fight scenes, likable characters, and one iconic performance from Ron Perlman as Hellboy. You are the ones who are responsible for trying to bring this franchise up, to expand on the mythology of Hellboy, to bring something interesting and new to the table, to make us feel like we're watching a great Hellboy movie again, to make us completely feel like that we got our money's worth a decade ago. However, what most fans out in the world, including myself, who really like the first two Hellboy movies, were given the exact polar opposite. Now, here's the thing when it comes to me reviewing rebooted or remade movies. I can forgive certain reboots or certain remakes that try to revitalize the franchise, but do something incredible with it. For example, when it comes to the superhero genre, the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy. It gave us a new, dark, and different side of the story with the characters of Bruce Wayne and Batman, and with extremely well-written scripts, albeit aside from The Dark Knight Rises at a couple times, as well as phenomenal performances, phenomenal characters. Those three movies still hold up by today's standards as not only one of the greatest superhero movies ever made, but it still holds up today as one of the greatest trilogies of all time. However, when it comes to rebooting or revitalizing a franchise, especially when it comes to the superhero genre, Hellboy is one of the worst of its kind, and it's one of the worst rebooted superhero movies that I have ever seen in my life. I'd rather watch Venom than this movie. I'm not even exaggerating when I say it at this point. It is exactly this bad of a superhero film. So, in summation, after this long diatribe, what exactly happens in this reboot of Hellboy? Well, in this reboot of Hellboy, it's exactly kind of the same exact story that happened in the first Hellboy, except with a different twist. So instead of Ron Perlman as the title character, we have David Harbour as the new Hellboy, a demon that was resurrected from hell during a Nazi experiment that was basically prophesized to end the entire world, but instead works for the forces of good and works alongside the Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense, only to stop monsters from wreaking havoc across the globe. And one of those particular forces is the Blood Queen Namu, played by Mila Jovovich, who appears in this movie to be in not only one of the worst movies of her entire career, who was resurrected after being killed by King Arthur. Yeah, more King Arthur movies. Isn't that awesome? And her big master plan is, wait for it, to take over the entire world. I've never seen such an interesting concept from an evil villain in my life. And so it's up to Hellboy and the rest of his side companions, who you care nothing about, to stop the Blood Queen from bringing hell on Earth. So now that we got that out of the way, what better way to talk about Hellboy than who else? The title character, played by David Harbour. To make a simple comparison, let me use metal band analogies, specifically Iron Maiden analogies. Whereas Ron Perlman is more or less the Bruce Dickinson of Hellboys, David Harbour is the Blaze Bailey of Hellboys. Whereas Ron Perlman was a fun-loving badass with a dry sense of humor, but in terms of David Harbour's Hellboy, the movie essentially makes this version of Hellboy a grating, annoying, obnoxious mongoloid. Here's the thing. David Harbour in this movie is not bad because he doesn't act like Ron Perlman. He sucks in this movie because it's lifeless, generic, and downright grating to listen to. First and foremost, his attempts at comedy and his jokes in this movie are about as unfunny as Stephen Colbert. But the second part, I'm not even kidding about this, every single time that David Harbour's Hellboy would whine or scream about anything, it made me want to pull my hair out. It's like going to your least favorite cousin's house for about 2 hours, where every time he screams or talks, it's very loud and obnoxious, and you just want to leave. And another big thing about Hellboy, he has daddy issues. You know how in the first movie, it really did get into the meat and the potatoes between the relationship between Hellboy and his father? Well, that. Now we have Al Swearingen himself, Ian McShane, completely go out of his way to care less about Hellboy and to verbally abuse him every which way he turns. And I know you're probably wondering, okay, what about the secondary characters? Well, let me answer those questions with 2 questions. 1, what secondary characters? All I see are a bunch of side characters who don't have a defining feature of their own, rather than just being irritating and saying the F word for the 400th time, or being brutish and acting all serious and tough-minded. And second of all, Who cares? You don't even care about these characters in the long run, and every time something may happen to do with their character may be slightly interesting, it ends up falling flat on their faces. One of the absolute biggest things that hurt this movie is the fact that the script and the tone are all over the place with no sense of cohesion. The entire script as a whole has no idea what it's doing. In order for the plot to move forward, they would have to have terrible scenes of flashbacks and exposition, numerous incoherent location jumps, pointless scenes that don't add anything to the story, or moral dilemmas that were straight out of the first two Hellboy movies that have been done before and better. And the tone is all over the place specifically because of the fact that this movie switches from Guardians of the Galaxy to Doom, where you have very unfunny, lighthearted humor that's supposed to be endearing and likable, but it's not. And in the next scene, you would get this rated R violence where bodies are flying, people's faces are getting ripped out, heads are being decapitated. And when you try to combine those two elements together in a movie like this, it doesn't even work. Now, normally when it comes to an action scene, I would usually love blood and violence in an action movie. For example, Hardcore Henry absolutely delivers on it, while also at the same time being a badass movie. But in Hellboy, it's exhausting. Of course, it's very gruesome to watch, and you're kind of like, okay, it's kind of fun. But by the time the gore action scenes start to wear out its welcome, you start to get bored. You start to get exhausted. And what makes the action scenes worse is because of two specific factors: the visual effects and the editing. First of all, the editing is so poorly used and mishandled and choppy to the point where you have no idea what is going on, that the action scenes are moving at an incredibly fast pace to where it doesn't have time for the action scenes to breathe. And how about this little nugget? The visual effects in this movie are the icing on the cake when it comes to Hellboy. And I don't mean it in a good way. These visual effects are terrible. Sure, while there are some practical effects throughout this movie, sometimes, but throughout the vast majority of the scenes that consist of anything with CGI, it's the kind of visual effects that would make a movie like the live-action Scooby-Doo movies proud. From the giant monsters that come out of the ground, and while they do have a very interesting and unique design to them, they're barely in the movie for all about 2 minutes, to some of the visual effects of the creatures look terrible. One of them, who is essentially a boar that has a vendetta against Hellboy. At first, he looks interesting with some uses of practical effects, but for most of his appearance, he looks like something out of the Scorpion King or Mortal Kombat Annihilation. And not to forget, the abhorrent green screen compositing. I'm not making this up. It's in a scene where Hellboy is fighting 3 giants. Be prepared for that. And just for good measure, the film tries to make a terrible attempt at sequel baiting itself. Because it first starts off with the screen going to black, indicating that the movie's probably over, but then all of a sudden it cuts to a secret location referencing a character that was in the previous 2 Hellboy movies just to set up a sequel, which I doubt will ever happen with this film. Now, here's the thing, guys. Neil Marshall directed this movie, and funnily enough, I like Neil Marshall. I think he is incredibly capable of making unique stuff. For example, The Descent is one of my favorite horror movies of all time, if not my personal favorite. Dog Soldiers and Centurion are loads of fun. But when it came to the producers, the writers, and even Lionsgate itself, they all managed to raise their middle fingers in unison and managed to defile one of the greatest and underrated gems in Guillermo del Toro's filmography. Without that, Hellboy is just a terrible movie. With that prelude, it is the cinematic equivalent of hell on earth. It's a colossal critical and financial catastrophe that is made all the more loathsome based upon the fact that a 3rd Hellboy movie starring Ron Perlman is what we truly deserve, and this reboot would have been 100% avoidable to make. The acting is terrible, especially from David Harbour as Hellboy. The visual effects are atrocious. The script and the tone are all over the place with no sense of direction, with pointless, one-dimensional, unlikable supporting characters, appalling editing, exhausting action sequences, and it's a film with a sequel beta ending that manages to raise the middle finger for all of the Hellboy fans that loved the 2 movies in the past. Hellboy 2019 without hesitation gets a 0 out of 5. Alright guys, so that is my review of Hellboy. Comment below, let me know what you thought about the movie. Find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and find me on Xbox if you're in the gaming mood. And also, if you would like to see more reviews or rants like this, be sure to subscribe for more. My name is Luke Nukem, and Lionsgate, hell awaits you.